Did you hear any noises or any screaming or any shouting or nothing? Any gunshots?
Yeah, we had some gunshots go off, but Harry's always letting off gunshots. That's nice enough.
In 1966, 3 children would vanish off the face of the earth in one of Australia's oldest cold cases. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Beaumont children. Viewer discretion is advised. The Beaumont children were 3 kids who were born to Grant Jim Beaumont and Nancy Beaumont, and the family lived in Adelaide in Australia. Jane was the oldest. She was born on September 10th, 1956. Arna was born on November 11th, 1958. And the brother Grant was born on July 12th, 1961. The 3 of them obviously grew up with each other, and they loved each other dearly. They would hang out together all the time. They would play all the time. This is back at a time, this is in the 60s, when kids were kids, and they actually went outside, and they played, and they hung out with friends until the streetlights came on, kind of thing. Now, this is also during a time when kids felt safe to be kids. Not like you kind of have to worry about nowadays with people just snatching you up off the street. Back then it was different. Kids would go outside and play without any care in the world. They wouldn't have to worry about strangers. They felt safe. They felt protected. And, back then parents would let their kids go places on their own. They would let them get onto a bus and go down the street to a nearby hangout spot. Even young kids. This is at a time when no one locked their doors or their windows, and everyone just felt safe. The community was community, legitimate community. People knew each other, they all knew each other well, and they all trusted one another. And the Beaumont kids were no different. They were happy kids. They were always laughing and smiling and just playing and having a good time. They were just being kids. The family lived at 109 Harding Street, which was, I guess, in Somerton Park. And that is, I guess, a part of Adelaide, which is in South Australia. They lived about a 5-minute drive down the road from Glenelg Beach, a popular beach where a lot of people would hang out. Now, this story happened in January, which, to those who don't know, January is basically like the summertime for them in Australia, where it's, obviously the dead of winter for us here. We're used to freezing our butts off. But in Australia in January, they're going to the beach. They're going swimming. They're not wearing jackets and snow boots. They're hot. And this particular day, it was apparently about 40 degrees Celsius, which would be a little over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a hot day, and a lot of people would be going to Glenelg Beach to cool off, get in the water, have some fun, splash around, get a tan, what have you. The Beaumont kids would go to Glenelg Beach kind of often. As a matter of fact, the day before this case happens, they had gone down there. Their mother allowed them to go onto a bus and take the 5-minute trip down the street to the beach. Again, please don't go at the parents here and judge the parents here. This was a much different time. The reason why you and I are more paranoid, these days, especially those of you who are parents, I'm not a parent, but to those of you who are parents, you're a lot more paranoid because of stories like this happening. But back then, they didn't have a lot of these stories. And also back then, they didn't have a ton of news circulations going around. There wasn't like a bunch of newspapers and nationwide news stations. And so people didn't hear a lot about stories like this, but they also just didn't happen that much. But because they happened is the reason why you may feel you need to judge the parents in the situation. But again, different times, so please be aware of that. But the day prior, they had gone to the beach and they came home. No issues at all. I guess Arna, the middle child, had told their mom that Jane had herself a boyfriend down at the beach. And her mom didn't really know if that was just some kind of like cheeky comment, just Arna being, silly or what. But she didn't really take it, seriously. And so the kids, when they asked their mom on the morning of January 26, 1966, if they can go back to Glenelg Beach, even with this kind of mysterious boyfriend comment, the mom said yes, of course. It was, like I said, a 5-minute bus ride, 3 kilometers down the road. Their mom gave them a small amount of money, enough for the bus fare, and let them go on the bus and head down to the beach. Their mom didn't realize that would be the last time she would ever see them again. She set them off on the bus at about 8:45 that morning, and she was expecting them back sometime around noon. But when the noon bus came back to their neighborhood, the kids weren't on it. And so she was like, okay, maybe they just are running late. They missed a bus. So then she waited for the next bus to come. The kids weren't on it. By 3 p.m., Jim had come home, their dad, and he was at a work trip somewhere south. And so he got home around 3 p.m. and, the mom told him, like, listen, the kids aren't home. I'm very worried. So then he himself gets in the car and he drives down the street to the Glenelg Beach, and he starts looking for them in a panic. He can't find them anywhere. I mean, the beach is still crowded, a lot of people there. He gets on foot and he's just searching every which way he can. And so he can't find them. He goes back home. He and his wife then go to the streets, and they start street by street searching for him, asking neighbors if they had seen the kids. By 5:30 p.m. that night, after no luck finding the girls or any idea where the heck they are, they went to the police to report them missing. At first, police were like, let's not worry right now. Maybe they just lost track of time and they're out there somewhere and they're going to be home soon. But that never happened. So then the police began their search. They began searching the beach itself. They then began searching the sand hills that are over there. They literally went into the ocean and they looked for him. They checked all of the nearby businesses, all the nearby buildings. They knocked on doors. They had no luck actually finding the girls whatsoever. This, within 24 hours, became, despite the lack of news, sources at the time, this became a humongous story immediately. And I mean, this got just so many people to crowd to the beach, watching the police search for the girls, helping search for the girls and the boy. And it just all led to nothing. A day or so into this, they are starting to kind of go into this panic mode of, there's a pedophile on the loose. There's a sex-crazed maniac on the loose, a kidnapper, a child murderer. No one knew. Nobody knew what was going on and what happened to these kids. And so as police begin the interview process, they're interviewing everyone who they could find that would come forward about, they were on the beach that afternoon or they were in that area that afternoon. They would start to get some tips. They got some information from several people. There were several people who said they saw the 3 kids near the Collie Reserve, which is right off of Glenelg Beach, and they were with a strange man that these witnesses didn't recognize or know. He was described as a tall, slender man. He had like light brown hair, very thin face. He was maybe in his mid-30s. He was described as having a very sun-baked type of complexion to his skin, and he was wearing swim trunks. The 3 kids appeared to, it looked as if they knew this man because they seemed to be very comfortable around him, and they were playing. This strange man was playing with these kids. And that's kind of back when, the kid's mom, when this is all going on, she remembered, wait a minute, Arna had told me that Jane had this boyfriend at the beach. Is this the guy? Is this why it looks like he knew the kids already? Was he mingling with them prior to this day in order to build up their trust to take them? Maybe. This guy apparently approached one person and said, hey, have you seen one of these girls' backpacks or something? Because I guess one of the girls misplaced it. And he said there was money missing from the bag. And so, it just added to the fact that this guy seemed to know these kids. Witnesses said the man would go into a changing room near the beach he would get changed back into his normal clothes, and the three kids, the Beaumont kids, who everyone confirmed was them, were just standing outside waiting for this guy to be done. Who the heck was this guy? The parents didn't know who he was. And then at about 12:15 p.m., other witnesses would state they saw the kids walking away with this man. And they went somewhere. At about 2:30, maybe closer to 3 p.m., another witness said they saw the kids again with this man. The man had one of the kids' bags draped over his shoulder. Again, it almost appeared to witnesses who didn't know them that this was maybe even their dad. And that's when another witness would come forward, someone who worked at a nearby pastry place or bakery called Wenzel's Bakery. And this was on Mosley Street. I guess it's really not that far from the beach from what I understand. So the person who worked there would tell police that all three kids had come in. There was no man with them. And Jane had purchased pastries, and then she also purchased a meat pie, which was very unusual to this person who worked there because they knew the kids, because the kids had been there several times before. They had never purchased a meat pie ever. They always purchased sweets or pastries. And Jane handed the person a £1 note. When Jane's mom found out about this, she was like, that's weird. I didn't give them any £1 note. She had only given the kids, I guess, shillings and 6 pence, 6 shillings and 6 pence, enough to buy a small lunch and enough to buy their bus fare. But she never gave them a £1 note, and they had never purchased a meat pie before. So the belief is that the man had sent them in to buy their own, pastries, but also he must have given them this note to buy him a meat pie. But he maybe didn't want to be seen in the pastry shop with them. As the days go by, they have nothing. Weeks go by, they have nothing. Months go by, nothing. No sign of the kids. No article of clothing. Their backpacks aren't found. Nothing is found. There had been other people who said, I saw them here, I saw them there, and we're talking like they saw them weeks or months after the disappearance, but police would go to all of these potential sightings, and they would end up determining that they either didn't see the kids at all, or it was just completely different kids. By November of 1966, they're desperate. The police aren't really getting anywhere with this, and so they bring in a psychic. A Dutch psychic is flown in to help them in any way that he possibly can. It really wasn't successful. He essentially led the police and the family on this wild goose chase. He kept saying different things as each day goes by, different, visions and different things. And it all it was all meaningless. I mean, he even at one point identified where their bodies were. They go there, they search, they even demolish a place based on this guy's word, and they don't find anything. It was all just hogwash. So who are possible suspects? Well, police did have about a handful or so of people they believed could be responsible for this. One was a man by the name of Bevan Van Einman. Now, later down the road in 1984, Van Einman is actually convicted of murdering a teenager named Richard Kelvin, also in Adelaide, so the same exact area the three kids go missing. Van Einman was considered a suspect in other missing kids cases and other murdered kids cases, but he was really ever only officially linked to Richard Kelvin. But police had an informant that had spoken to Van Einman and said that Van Einman had bragged about kidnapping the three kids. He was almost boasting about it, He apparently said he did this to conduct experiments on children. But the kids died during this process, something he didn't intend to happen. And then he had just dumped their bodies in a nearby, wilderness area in Adelaide. And police would search that area, but they never found anything. Van Einman had also, I guess, been caught on occasion of peeping into changing rooms, especially the ladies' rooms or where kids would change. And so he was a known like pedophile in the area. Like he was not a good dude. Another thing they had noticed was that there was obviously a lot of cameras and they were doing a lot of filming when police were searching for the kids near the beach. There was one point where the camera pans over to this like row of onlookers who were watching, and police later on notice a man wearing glasses who looks a lot like Von Einman. And they weren't sure if it was him. You know, they tried to doctor the photo up as best as they could to make it clear, but they couldn't say for sure it was him. But it looked a hell of a lot like him, which could give credence to him being the one responsible, because a lot of times these guys who do these kinds of things, they want to go back to the scene of the crime and they want to watch in a creepy way. I think even to this day, someone can correct me if I'm wrong if you live in the area, but I think Von Einman is still technically considered a person of interest in the Beaumont children disappearance. From what I understand, he is still alive in prison. Another suspect they had was James Ryan O'Neill. Later down the road, he too would be convicted of murdering a child that happened in 1975. He had killed a 9-year-old boy in Tasmania, and he too had told people that he was the one who took the Beaumont children and did away with them. And then, I guess later, someone or police would ask him about it, and he would then say, I couldn't have done it. I was in Melbourne at the time. I wasn't even in the area. And then he was asked again down the road, did you kill the Beaumont children? And he said, listen, based on advice I've been given by lawyers, I'm not going to comment. Okay? The police there in South Australia had interviewed him. They looked into him, his whereabouts and whatnot. And from what I understand, he ultimately was cleared as a suspect. There were other men like Arthur Stanley Brown, Derek Ernest Percy. These are other known pedophiles or abductors or child killers in the area who had all been looked at as possible suspects in taking the Beaumont kids, but ultimately they were essentially cleared for the most part. The biggest suspect police had was a man named Harry Fipps. Harry was a man who owned a factory in the area in Adelaide where all of this took place. He was a highly regarded, high-ranking public, official or person in this area. At the time of the case, Harry Fipps looked very similar to this description of what people would refer to as the Satin Man. And I'll get to why he's called the Satin Man here in a minute. Or he looked a lot like the man the kids were seen with. And if you really put the images next to each other, honestly, yeah, it does. They do look very similar. But then again, so does a couple of the other suspects too. They look pretty close. Phipps was a rich man. From what I believe, he was well known in the area, which is what makes me wonder, if he was well known, wouldn't people have recognized him as for sure being the man that this was seen with the kids? That's the one thing I'm confused by, because he wasn't like this guy that nobody knew existed. He was also known, however, to give £1 notes to people, which is what the kids had used to pay for a meat pie. He only lived just 300 meters down the road from the beach, and he was also considered to be a pedophile. At the beginning of this video, I played a segment of an interview that his son Hayden gave to police many years later. And so here is that snippet of interview.
When did you get home?
Between 12 and 12:30.
You said you saw the kids.
Yeah, I've seen them come in.
Can you describe them to me now?
The little kids, one's a little bit shorter than the rest, with short haircuts. I think they had towels. I think they had beach towels.
Did you see them talking to Harry?
Yeah.
Did you hear what they're saying?
No, it's too far away.
How long had you seen them for? How long were you standing talking to Harry?
Oh, only long enough until he took them inside. Well, he took them inside.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I came out of the cubby house and went inside to see if it was going on. And the front door was open. So I just assumed they left out the front door.
Did you hear any noises or any screaming or any shouting or nothing? Any gunshots?
Yeah, we had some gunshots go off, but Harry's always letting off gunshots. That means nothing.
I think it was all with the kids in the house. There was gunshots going on.
No, not in that place.
How many shots did you hear?
4.
So a little backstory is that Hayden, and this is the reason why there's a book called The Satin Man, and the reason why people kind of refer to this potential abductor as the Satin Man is because Hayden was, as he grew up, he alleged that he had been sexually abused and assaulted by his father for years, until he was about 14 years old, when he was old enough and strong enough to fight back and say, basically, if you touch me again, I'm going to do something to you. And so his father eventually had stopped sexually abusing him. But he abused him just so many times over the years. And he said he always knew when it was about to happen because he could hear the sound of his father's satin pajamas, whoosh, whoosh, whooshing together as he walked down the hall. And walking into his room, you can hear that sound. And so, he kind of referred to him as the Satin Man. So back when this happened, Hayden was only 15 years old. And I guess he had a tree house in their yard. This interview, by the way, doesn't happen until way down the road in 2000, I want to like 6 or 7 or so. And so this is many, many years later. But he said on January 26th, and he remembers that day because I guess it was Australia Day, and he remembers it as being a very unusually very hot day. And he said that he saw the children, the Beaumont children, he says, in the yard with his dad. From his treehouse, he sees this. That the kids had basically gone into the house. And he also says at some point he hears gunshots coming from the direction of the house. He says this isn't unusual, though, because his dad would always shoot his gun around the house, or I guess outside the house. So it wasn't like something that necessarily meant anything. And he said he heard 4 shots. Then he said he saw his dad loading up something that was covered. It looked like, he said, like a surfboard type shape that his dad was loading into the trunk of his car. And there were like 3 of them. And then his dad drove away. At that time, it sounded like he believed that those were the Beaumont kids and that his dad killed them. He would also be asked, like, do you believe your father is capable of killing kids? And he said, absolutely. Absolutely, he's capable of it. He didn't even hesitate. He said, yeah, I'm pretty sure he would kill kids. He sexually assaulted, him forever, for like a decade. And then once this story broke out, 2 other people who were the same age as Hayden back in 1966 would come forward to police all these years later and say that, well, Mr. Fipps, he paid us to dig up earth on one of his factories. And then he, I guess, according to these 2 witnesses, Fipps would pay them and told them to fuck off and don't ever talk about this. So in 2013, police would go to the area where that factory had been, or still, I guess, kind of is, and they dig. They dig and they dig and they dig, and they find nothing. And that's when one of the 2 witnesses who said they helped, dig these holes said, oh shit, I think we're in the wrong spot. They dug the wrong spot because some things had changed about this location, like a gate that used to be there was no longer there. And so the gate had moved or something, and so the witness kind of just visually got it wrong. So they now kind of pinpoint the more accurate location. They bring in the ground radar technology thing, and they detect anomalies in the earth. And so they finally are able, I think in 2017 or 18, they finally dig and dig and dig some more, and it's nothing. It's animal bones. They find bones, but it's animal bones. There's no remains of kids in these graves. Now, one of Harry Fipps' other sons would later come forward to state that his brother Hayden was mentally unwell, basically. And what he said about his dad just wasn't true, and they were all lies, and he shouldn't be taken seriously. Now, at that point, when the brother said that, Hayden couldn't defend himself because Hayden had died. sadly. And unfortunately for police, in 2004, this is way before they start digging and get this information from Hayden, but in 2004, Harry Fipps died. And so even if he was the guy, he will never face justice. He will never be arrested. He'll never be able to be questioned. That's it. If he was the guy, that's it. He got away with it, you know? The disappearance of the Beaumont children was, at the time at least, one of the largest investigations in Australia's history. And it is now 2024. We are almost at the 58-year anniversary of this happening, and it is still unsolved, making this one of Australia's oldest cold cases. And one of the most infamous cases, not only in Australia, but honestly kind of throughout the world. These 3 sweet, innocent kids who just went down to the beach to play, to hang out, to go swimming, they just vanished. In the middle of the day. I mean, this was broad daylight where this happened, where there were so many potential witnesses, and many people came forward to say, yeah, we saw the kids, you know, and witnesses would state that we saw them here, we saw them there, we saw them here, and a lot of that would be corroborated, and the witness sightings were believed. It sounded like these were actual things, that these kids were seen with this unknown man. They, you know, one witness said they were standing on a street corner and they looked over across the way at the Wenzel's Bakery. They saw the kids going in there. There was a man kind of near them outside. And the bakery persons confirmed that the kids went in there, bought a thing, you know, bought a meat pie with a £1 note that their parents didn't give them. The kids were then seen, you know, they were also seen at the beach with this man, outside of a changing room, waiting for this man. Who was this man? Was it Harry Fipps? Was it one of the other suspects? Was it someone completely random and different that no one had even talked about? Nobody knows. Nobody knows for sure. This was a moment in Australia's history that really kind of changed a lot. Like I said at the beginning, people were it was easier for them to let their kids go out on their own and whatnot, and people trusted everyone and they were friendly with everyone. But this really turned the corner. Especially in Australia, where everyone's like, we're locking our doors, we're locking our windows, kids aren't going out on their own. Everyone at that point said, okay, this is a thing that happens. This is now a possibility. So now we're going to be protecting our kids like no other. And that kind of really would end up spreading throughout the world as well. And this is about the time when these cases start to happen more and more, and people start to become more and more aware, and they would evolve into becoming the protective people that, you know, many people are today. Sadly, the Beaumont children's parents, this would really kind of just rock their marriage, as it happens a lot in cases like this, puts a lot of stress, and so they would end up separating. And both parents, by 2018 or 19 or so, both of them have passed away. And they never found out what happened to their 3 kids. They never found them. They never found a trace of them. They don't know what happened to them, and they died never knowing. And sadly, that is where it is today. Nobody knows what happened to the Beaumont children. Not really. There's speculation, there's theory, there's suspects, there's rumors. They've dug, they've looked, they've searched, and they've gotten nothing. The kids were there, and then they were gone. They were clearly taken by someone. They don't believe the kids fell into the water and drowned, because there were so many people that would have seen this and stopped it. So many people saw them with this man who appeared to be maybe their father or someone that they knew. So no one really thought anything of it to rescue them. But if someone saw them drowning, people would have gone in there and helped. So it's obvious that they were kidnapped and that they were more than likely killed. But the thing is nobody knows for sure. There is no answer here. Could they be alive somewhere? Sure. The odds of that, pretty slim. They probably were killed that day, or held captive maybe, and killed within days. But sadly, there was a much different time, and investigative tools just weren't as prominent as we have now. If you have any information about what may have happened to the Beaumont children, the time, it's been far too long. If you have information, please come forward. to the police there in South Australia. Please let Australia know. Please give them this. Give them the answer to the question that has been plaguing them for almost 60 years. The Beaumont children deserve it. The Beaumont children deserve to be laid to rest. The Beaumont children and their parents, they deserve justice. But that is it for this case, True Crime Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. Bada bang, bada boom. That is it for this video, True Crime Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. Again, why am I talking like an old-timey 1920s person? I don't know, see? Meh. What am I doing? I don't even know. I'm trying to say goodbye in my way, but I don't know how to do it, see? Meh. What? Meh. I don't know what I'm doing. See? Stop saying see. What am I doing? If you're new to the channel, I don't know how to end my videos, so I do stupid things like this. Is this working for you? No, probably not. It's not working for me. I continue to do it, though, so clearly I have mental health issues that need to be worked on, because now I sound like a dame from the 1920s. Please rescue me, sir. What am I doing? What? Stop it. I'm unwell. Two young girls were last seen walking to a restroom at a football match. They have never been seen since. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Adeleide abductions. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in Adelaide, which is in southern Australia, and the case occurred in 1973. Joanne Ratcliffe, who was born in 1962, she was 11 years old at the time this case happened. Kirsty Gordon, born in 1968, was just 4 years old. For over 50 years, their families, their friends, everyone in this community has wondered what happened to them. It was August 25th, 1973. Joanne and Kirsty were at a football match with both of their families, and I guess their families were acquainted, and they were sitting next to each other. They were watching this football match at the Adelaide Oval, a fairly decent-sized stadium, and it was a packed house that particular day. Thousands and thousands of people were there, which would mean that there are potentially thousands and thousands of witnesses to what happened. On the afternoon the match was taking place, Kirsty and Joanne were asked to get up and use the restroom, and their parents said, yes, that's fine. So the 11-year-old Joanne and the 4-year-old Kirsty got up from their seats. They walked out of the portion of the stadium where they were sitting, walked to the women's restroom, and that's it. Their families would never see them again. Within, a very, very short amount of time, they realized the girls weren't coming back to their seats. They went to go look for them. They went to the ladies' room, which was just outside where they were sitting, but they weren't in there. They looked at other restrooms. They looked, they were just searching the entire stadium. They can't find them. They're missing. And so the parents of both families report their girls missing. They left their seats at approximately 3:45 p.m. and they were reported missing officially at 5:12 p.m. Now, when I said earlier that there are potentially thousands and thousands of witnesses, well, in fact, there were witnesses that think they saw what may have possibly happened. There were some witnesses who said they saw the two girls playing with like a cat that got into the stadium with other kids. But it's kind of hard to know if they really saw those two girls. But the most substantial witness sighting is that the two young girls were seen in the company of a slightly older gentleman wearing a hat. The man was physically holding Kirsty Gordon, or what was believed to be her, and then the other little girl, presumed to be Joanne, was walking next to them. To everyone from the outside looking in, this looks like just a guy carrying his two kids, or walking with his two kids. After this sighting, there would be some people who said they saw the two girls near like a railroad station, and there were other like potential sightings kind of peppered in there all over the place, but none of those leads ever panned out. The most substantial one they had was of this man who was potentially in the company of these two young girls. A gigantic search party began. I mean, the police, the family, friends, Volunteers are all out there looking for these two girls. They, at the time, offered a $5,000 reward for anything that would help bring them home. The case rapidly spread. It got widespread attention all over Australia. There were even some potential connections to another abduction, and that was with regards to the missing 3 children, the Beaumont children, who I believe I've covered their case on here before. They disappeared, were allegedly kidnapped in 1966. And so while there is that potential connection, they don't really have any proof that these two different cases are related at all. The parents of both girls would state that they've all been to this, the Oval many, many times before. They had let their kids go to the bathrooms on their own before, and they never had issues. And the Ratcliffe said that their daughter, Joanne, is not someone who just wanders off on her own. She was the older of the 2 kids, but there just is no way. So they really did believe that this was definitely an abduction. Now it's just a matter of finding out where they are. But unfortunately, their case goes cold pretty quickly. They did put out the composite drawing of the older gentleman who was seen with these 2 young girls, and it's kind of a pretty frightening looking image, but at least to me. But they put this image all over the news. People saw it all over the country, but they really did not get any substantial tips with regards to the composite drawing. And because of how many people were there that day and how many different witness sightings you would have to kind of investigate, like these are 2 little girls that look like pretty much any 2 little girls, right? And so you're going to get a lot of unnecessary or wrong information, but from people who are literally trying to help, but it doesn't help that there were thousands of people there who could have seen something and who could have all seen or interpreted something differently than one another. But like I said, the case, it just goes cold, and it goes cold and colder and colder and colder. And we are now here in 2025. I'm filming this on May 29th, 2025. There still is no answers. Some of the suspects in the Beaumont children case, like Bevan Spencer von Einem and Derek Percy, were at times considered suspects in this case as well. But in terms of either case, no one has ever been apprehended, indicted, or charged or anything. The biggest suspect they have is a man named Arthur Stanley Brown. And when you see images of him, it's eerie. It's actually borderline frightening. Because they have images of him wearing the same hat, basically, that the witnesses saw this man wearing. And if you put these 2 images side by side, it's like, holy crap, that looks like the guy. That's the same guy. And they got tips and leads about Stanley Hart over the years. As a matter of fact, because he has been such a prominent suspect in this case, they've been able to search several properties that had been owned by Stanley Hart. And the thing is that Stanley Hart was known to frequent the Adelaide Oval many, many, many times. Every time there was a match there, he was there. When they put out Stanley's image in the late 90s, they actually had one of the witnesses who saw the potential abduction happen, would say, oh my God, that is the guy. That's the guy I saw. Because they're showing his image on the news. And even after 20 plus years, she's like, that's who I saw. About 10 years after the girls went missing, Stanley would be labeled a child abuser. They got information from a man named Mark Marshall, who was actually the grandson of Stanley Hart. And he had at one point given testimony, and he actually described the attack against Joanne, that Joanne had been struck by a glass bottle by his grandfather, Stanley. Now, by the time that Mark comes forward with this information, he is actually already himself a pedophile. He says that his grandpa kidnapped those 2 young girls, basically played it off as if they were his girls. He even claimed to police that he knew where the 2 girls were now buried. He gave them locations, I guess, near the town of Yatina, and also a tunnel near the Pekina Reservoir in terms of where you could find evidence and stuff like that. Mark Marshall would end up looking at a map with police, and he put a big X on where the girls were, that they were put in barrels and buried there. Well, police, now all these years later, and this is probably like decades later at this point, they go to that area and they search. As a matter of fact, they actually find a couple of barrels. However, when they open them up, there's nothing. They searched an area of tunnels that he said would have evidence. They didn't find anything. They would then search farm properties near where Stanley Hart used to have a farm. Now it's this big open field. And even the people who own it, I guess at this point, are like, yeah, go ahead, search. I mean, we know the story. If you need to search our property, search it. And literally just within a day or so of me filming this video, there was a new article that came out. So there was, I guess back in March or April or so, there was a specific targeted area. They're going to be doing some excavation in terms of investigating this case. And they are digging in the areas where, you know, from before this Mark person had said where you could find evidence or find the bodies. Lo and behold, just a few months ago, they found a tiny bone fragment in the exact area where Mark said to search. It's a very small piece of bone. You can see it here compared to the size of a coin. And what's most interesting about it is because Mark had said that a glass bottle was used on one of the girls and that his grandpa made him smash that green bottle, which had little, green reflective glass. Well, in this bone fragment, they actually see tiny pieces of green glass, like they're little itty bitty specks of glass, which actually it backs up his story as to what he's been telling them. In that same area, they also found a shoe, or maybe a couple of shoes, and they were very consistent with the type of shoes that one of the girls was wearing on the day of the abduction. They also found, I guess, some buckles. They found a deteriorated suitcase lining to go along with the bone and the shoes. The bone and the shoes are the most promising evidence they've gotten in a very, very long time because they haven't gotten any evidence. So they take a picture of the bones and they show them to experts. And one expert says that he does not believe that that is actually a human bone. They also reached out to a specialist who was not in Australia. He says that the image of the bone they've seen or he saw looks like it could have potentially come from the pelvic area of a young girl. Now again, both of these experts have only looked at it as a photo. They have not physically handled it, as of me filming this video at least, and taking DNA from it or anything like that. That's probably all still in the works. And so the way that because at this point there's private investigators working on this case. At this point they are basically saying that right now we're going with that's human bone because we found a child's shoe, right? That would have been worn by one of the girls that day. And so until someone says this is definitively not a human bone, they're going with it's a human bone and that they're on the right track. Because once they can establish this bone fragment as a human bone, they can now take this investigation to a whole new level. And a lot of the money that's being used to excavate this stuff is not really coming from police. It sounds like it's coming from volunteers. And every penny they've gotten through people donating has gone towards investigating, digging, all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing. In the end, the two girls have still never been located. Until they identify that bone as human, they haven't found anyone. I've been reading some articles. One of their sisters, her name is Susie, and she has been putting a ton of her own effort and work into trying to find her sister, and along with Kirsty, because if they find Joanne, they're going to find Kirsty. That's the belief. These weren't like two girls who were abducted by two different people by just random chance. They were both taken by the same person. Susie has helped establish, I guess, an awareness group out there called the Leave a Light On group. And it's really been a lot of her hard work and the private investigators' hard work because I guess the actual police, there's only not much they can do until they have actual evidence to work with. I don't know how the law works in Australia. I mean, here in the States, you need proof and stuff like that. You need evidence to get warrants and stuff here, so I'm sure it's fairly similar out there. But a private investigator and private people, they don't have to cut through red tape or anything. But based on the testimony of the grandson Mark, based on him saying that the two girls were taken to the area of Yatina and they were brought to his shack where they were both killed and then they were both buried. He was there with his grandpa when he was injuring them or killing them, and here's where you can find them buried. I mean, that is really the only solid thing that's come out of all of this, is that it's brought them to a location where he said they would be, where they found a shoe and they found a bone fragment. And the sister Susie, I mean, I saw a quote where she says that she believes in her heart of heart that it was Stanley Hart who did this to those two girls. There was also, I guess, a family friend at that soccer match with the two families. He only is known by the name Frank. According to some of the people who were there with them, Frank, who was sitting in that same group, got up and left approximately 30 minutes before the girls did. Frank, knew the families and knew the routine these girls would take to go to the bathroom, because there was like a routine, I guess. And when they first realized the girls were missing, Frank was now back into his seat, but he did not get up and help search. He did not look for them. So was Frank involved and helped, Stanley? Was Frank involved and he did all on his own, but then how did he do anything to the girls? What did he do with them in a short amount of time that nobody could find them? Those are questions that are pretty much going to be left unknown, because their biggest suspect, Stanley Hart, who all the properties they've searched have been his properties. By the way, I don't know if they have established a connection between Stanley and this Frank person. I don't know what Frank's actual name is, but everything is pointing towards Stanley Hart. I mean, you have an eyewitness account from, a convicted pedophile at this point, but still something, and you find evidence at locations where Stanley lived or resided at. It all kind of just sort of points to them. Even the families are like, yeah, it sounds like it's him. However, Stanley Arthur Hart will never face justice if he did something to those two girls. In June of 1999, Stanley Arthur Hart died an old man, taking with him to the grave any information and any truth about what happened to those two girls. And so now it may no longer be about getting justice, because if it wasn't him, then obviously you have another suspect to look for. But the goal now is to find the two girls. That's the most important thing that they are trying to do. They are out there somewhere. They're buried somewhere. In all likelihood, if Stanley did all of this, he probably moved their bodies more than once. I mean, it's been known to happen. They do that once they think police might be onto them. They're nervous, they're living at a property, they move to a different property, they want to move the body somewhere else. It's happened before countless times. And so there is evidence that those girls were at least at one point buried there, potentially, maybe. And so that's it. They're just going to be out there looking for them. And if Stanley was the guy, he got away with it. And hopefully he's rotting in hell. If it wasn't him, they got more work to do. Another potential suspect was, I guess, a man named Errol George Redan. He was a known pedophile in the area when all of this happened as well. He was investigated very briefly before 2022 because that's when he died. I guess he looked pretty similar to the composite drawing as well. But I don't know, when I see that composite drawing next to the image of Stanley, I'm like, holy shit, that looks just like him. I mean, that's that's almost identical, but it is just a drawing. And so it's not, it's not an image of the actual person. But this Errol Redan person, they investigated him, but then he died in 2022, and they never found any evidence that he had any connection to the girl's disappearance. I mean, they did search his property, and they found like clothing items that would be worn by young girls. They found them that he had stored them in some drainage system underneath his property, which is fucking weird as shit. But yeah, he had been convicted at one point for pedophilia, so there is a chance that maybe he could have done it. It doesn't really sound like they can say for sure who did this. So you have numerous suspects, you've got plenty of peoples of interest, but no evidence to directly link any of them to their disappearance. But the families of these two girls are going to be fighting like hell till their very last breaths to find out where those two girls are and if justice can be served to get justice. Someone somewhere out there might still be alive who knows the truth, who knows what happened to those two girls, and who can help bring those two girls home. Perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the whereabouts of those two young girls or what may have happened to them, you can call 131444. If you know something, if you saw something, please say something. Please help these two young girls get brought home and maybe, potentially, get the justice they rightfully deserve.
It's very, very tight.
Keep going.
It's closing on me.
Was this a freak accident, or was it something more nefarious? Hello, true crimerers. This is the mysterious case of Phoebe Hansjuk. Viewer discretion is advised. Phoebe Hansjuk was born on May 9th, 1986, and she lived in Melbourne, Australia. She was one of 3 kids. She also had 2 brothers, and she absolutely adored her brothers. They were very, very close. It's a very close family in general. They would describe Phoebe as a wild child, very active young woman as she got older. She had a humongous imagination. Phoebe loved being out in nature, out in the wild. Throughout her schooling years, she was always one of the more popular kids, very social person, very outgoing. And, a lot of that socializing, unfortunately, would lead her down a path kind of with alcohol and sometimes with drugs. She unfortunately battled a lot of issues with anxiety and depression. And, when she started experimenting with drugs and drinking alcohol, a lot of that was meant to kind of just help her alleviate those feelings, as a lot of people do. But at the same time, she was also seeing a therapist, and she was on prescribed medication for her mental health issues, and she was doing well with it. Phoebe was described by her friends and her family as being a very sensitive, very caring person. She was one of the more compassionate people you would ever meet. She was loyal to a fault to all of her friends. She had a huge sense of justice. So overall, Phoebe had this just really big personality, and she wasn't shy, and she was just, despite her depression and, anxiety, she still remained a very happy, very bubbly person. Someone that everybody loved. Everybody loved. Now, at some point, Phoebe would start dating a man named Anthony Hampel. Anthony was a very well-to-do guy. He was in a very well-to-do family, a well-known, respected family. He came from a family of judges. His dad was, at this point, a retired Victorian Supreme Court judge. And then his stepmom at the time was a county court judge. So Anthony had a lot of connections in the legal world. He was known to be a big stickler for things being like all in its place, very OCD, very clean, very organized, very labeled. And Phoebe was kind of like the opposite. She was kind of like that wild child. She liked organized chaos, if you will. Now, Anthony Hampel would tell you that his relationship with Phoebe had some ups, had some downs, but overall it was pretty good. But Phoebe's friends and family would say pretty much the opposite, that their relationship was one of turmoil. It was unstable, and it appeared, at the time of the story, to just be going away permanently. 3 months before this happens, they had broken up 4 different times, but then reconciled pretty quickly each time. Some friends said that Phoebe described Anthony as a very volatile person, that their home life was very volatile. The 2 of them lived together in this high-rise building in Melbourne. They lived on the 12th floor. That takes us to December 2nd, 2010. At approximately 7 p.m. that evening, one of the concierge of this apartment building would try to enter the garbage room. And this is the room where all the garbage chutes would go down to. And they were having a hard time opening the door, as if something was blocking the door. So finally they were able to kind of push the door open. And when they looked inside, there was a young woman on the floor, just in a pool of blood. The woman was 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk. So police were called, and they arrived pretty quickly. And an ambulance was called, and they arrived a few minutes after the police. Police restricted the ambulance individuals from going inside the garbage room because they said it looked as if Phoebe was already dead. Phoebe had a ton of bruises and abrasions on her torso and on her arms and legs. She had a fractured leg, and one of her feet was almost amputated. It had almost been severed off of her leg. About 12 to 15 minutes or so after everyone arrived, like police and ambulance, Phoebe was officially pronounced dead at the scene. However, no one can confirm if Phoebe was still alive when she was discovered because the ambulance personnel weren't allowed in the room for whatever insane reason. All because the police just assumed she was dead at that point when they first entered. There was a blood trail from Phoebe kind of farther into this garbage room. So that told them that Phoebe had managed to crawl at least a certain amount of distance before she just couldn't move anymore. The coroner determined that Phoebe had fallen, likely, through the garbage chute and landed feet first on the ground. There was a little bit of blood on the 12th floor garbage chute door, and since she lived on the 12th floor with her boyfriend, this told them that Phoebe, in some way, shape, or form, entered that garbage chute on the 12th floor and fell 12 floors to the garbage room below. In Phoebe's toxicology report, it showed that she had a sleeping drug, I guess known as Stilnox, and also 3 times the legal limit of alcohol in her blood system. Apparently, Stilnox does have a slight history of causing hallucinations, but not exactly common. Some people in case studies have been known to sleep drive and sleepwalk while on this particular medication. The coroner stated that with a blood alcohol level of 0.16, that they could not conclude with certainty that Phoebe Hansjuk entering that trash chute all on her own, they couldn't say if that was truly possible or not. Likely? That amount of alcohol mixed with a sleeping drug, a strong sleeping drug, would have impaired her a lot. Her friends would say that, Phoebe was typically 3 sheets to the wind after 2 drinks. So with that much alcohol and the sleeping drug, she likely would have had a very difficult time climbing into a garbage chute all on her own doing. But they also couldn't rule out that she got into that garbage chute on her own. They couldn't rule it out. They couldn't really say any direction. One thing of curiosity that they noted was that when Phoebe was discovered, her jeans were pulled halfway down her legs. They concluded that it was unlikely that her jeans were pulled down from the fall, because if that was the case, because of the very narrow space, her belt loops and everything would have been ripped, but they weren't. Everything was intact, but her pants were literally unbuttoned and unzipped. That being said, it would have been very difficult for her if her pants were already unbuttoned and unzipped and halfway down her legs. That would have made it even more difficult for her to climb into the garbage chute on her own. Now, it's possible when she fell to the ground, she may have, in her impairment, may have unbuttoned her pants and unzipped them and somehow got them halfway down for whatever reason. It's possible. So the garbage chute in question had an opening of 545 millimeters. That was the width of it. 300 millimeters in height, and it was 1,025 millimeters from the ground. The actual door itself would open up to 220 millimeters. It was a very, very tight fit. So they wouldn't use the actual one, but they rebuilt and recreated a chute with all the same exact dimensions and everything is the exact same. And they wanted to see if someone could enter it, just a sober person. And so they actually used one of Phoebe's friends who was about the same size as Phoebe. This friend had an incredibly difficult time just simply climbing into the chute by herself, even without being impaired. There, around the actual garbage chute, there was no railings, there was nothing to hold on to help pull yourself into it. So I don't know. It seems very odd that she would get in there on her own, but they also tested it again with a model that was the same size as Phoebe, and here is a brief clip of her trying to get into it.
It's very tight.
So she struggled mightily to get into that garbage chute, but she was eventually able to get into it on her own.
It's closing on me.
With limited movement, Danielle can only slide down the chute with her arms.
In order to fully go inside and slide down, she had to have her hands above her head completely. Otherwise, the arms would have restricted her from sliding down. They dusted the garbage chute where she would have entered, all of it, for fingerprints, and oddly enough, there wasn't any. And they found that to be very strange that there wasn't a single print on that chute, because there would have had to have been if Phoebe was climbing into it on her own. But the material on the garbage chute was brushed steel, which I guess is notorious for not always really allowing for fingerprints to be left behind. So there is that. So ultimately, it was possible for someone to climb into the chute on their own, someone of Phoebe's size. But it was an extreme struggle to do so without being impaired by any substances at all. So could Phoebe have done that when she was drunk and also on a strong sleeping pill? So police wanted to find out the timeline of Phoebe and basically everyone that day. Between 8:47 a.m. and 8:50 a.m. on Phoebe's iMac, there were two usages in Phoebe's email. At 9:01 a.m., because there were key cards required to leave and enter the building and all that, at 9:01 a.m., Anthony Hampol's card was used to leave the building to go to work. According to Anthony, Phoebe was still asleep when he left. At 11:50 a.m., for some reason, the fire alarm in the apartment building went off. During this time, you could see Phoebe on CCTV, leaving basically because of the fire alarm. She seemed calm, she seemed normal, but obviously you couldn't really get into her mind in this image. 4 minutes later, her card is used to access the apartment again. Anthony Hampel's co-workers said that they could account that Anthony was at work pretty much all day long, with the exception of about a 60-minute window of time during his lunch break that they didn't know where he went because they don't really ever ask that. It is important to note that his work was only approximately 10 minutes from the apartment building. That being said, there wasn't any usage of Anthony or Phoebe's card to enter or leave the building, not until 6:09 p.m. that night. He claims that when he got home, he cannot remember if his apartment door was locked or not, but he said at that point Phoebe was not home. But her purse and her access card were inside the apartment, so that if she did leave, she would have no way of getting back in. There were pieces of glass kind of scattered on the floor of the apartment. There was also small traces of blood in the apartment. There was some blood on the computer mouse, and there was blood, tiny amounts of blood, on the desk. According to Anthony, he says this put him into a lot of stress, a lot of distress. He was very uncomfortable. But he still just got onto the computer, logged into Facebook, and checked stuff. And he just sort of casually was on the internet, even though he says he was in distress because Phoebe wasn't there, there was blood, and there was glass. He also called Phoebe's father, and on that phone call, he mentioned nothing about the glass, nothing about the blood. Police investigation would discover that at 6:19 p.m., that was the last time that particular iMac was used by Anthony. He was then witnessed just casually having a cigarette. He would take care of the dog that they had, and he had a phone call with a coworker. At 6:20 p.m., another fire alarm in the building went off, again, for reasons I'm not really sure. Then at 7 p.m. approximately is when Phoebe was discovered in the garbage room. By 7:18 p.m., the police have arrived, and at that point is when, the ambulance has also been there, and they were basically refusing the ambulance access to Phoebe. At 7:20 p.m., this is actually before Anthony is even made aware that Phoebe has been discovered down below, because police had just arrived at 7:18, so it was still all happening very fast. But at 7:20 p.m., Anthony orders takeaway for one person, which is strange because there was a plan that night for Phoebe, Anthony, to go to dinner with Phoebe's father. So why would he order takeaway before he knew what happened to Phoebe? At 7:28 p.m. on a phone call, Phoebe's father to Anthony said, can you please call the police, inform them that Phoebe is missing? Because again, at this point, they don't know that Phoebe's already been found. And then finally, at 8:03 p.m., when the delivery driver arrives with his food, the delivery guy tells Anthony, hey, there's a whole bunch of police downstairs and an ambulance and stuff. What's going on? That is when Anthony calls the police to report Phoebe missing. Only when he's told that there's police down below for an unknown reason that he still hasn't been informed of yet. Then finally, Anthony is made aware of everything that happened. Phoebe's family would notate that in the days after all of this, Anthony he always appeared to be physically crying, like he was making the sounds and the cadences of crying, but they never saw any actual tears. Even the detective that night, the night that Phoebe was, discovered and everyone was told that she was deceased, the detective said that Anthony was appearing to fake cry. Like, again, no tears, just the sounds of it. So in their investigation, I guess a witness said that there was an unknown man kind of in the building, lingering around somehow, some way, at about 4 p.m. that afternoon, the day that Phoebe died. And there was, I guess, CCTV footage near one of the elevators that showed this man. They have absolutely no idea who this man is. They also have absolutely no idea if this man had anything to do with what happened to Phoebe. He was just really more of like a witness because he went to the 12th floor where Phoebe lived, where Phoebe was eventually entered that chute. But I guess they've never actually tracked him down, and they really haven't even bothered to attempt to track him down. He could be no one. He could be someone pretty big for this. But they have no idea, because they didn't investigate him. As a matter of fact, the police did not even question or look into anyone who may have entered the 12th floor that day. They didn't look into it. They didn't check camera footage themselves. Even though Phoebe was discovered officially by police at 7:18 p.m., the building wasn't even cordoned off until approximately 9:30 p.m., which means that residences of this building were entering and leaving willy-nilly, and possible witnesses, possible culprits were leaving. Their apartment, Phoebe's apartment, was not considered even a crime scene until 8:46 p.m. when police asked everyone to leave the apartment. In the meantime, Anthony was in there eating food and doing whatever else on his own. They didn't collect any evidence from the trash chute room where Phoebe was found. They didn't pick up any trash pieces. They didn't sift through the garbage. They didn't do anything. They didn't collect anything. The police only looked in one trash can in Phoebe's apartment. That's the extent of their search. They didn't take any of the blood. They didn't take any of the glass. They didn't forensically analyze any of it. The iMac that Phoebe used wasn't even taken into police custody until a year later, meaning so many things could have been deleted and God knows what else done to this computer. Phoebe's cellular devices, because she had a couple, I guess, were not even taken into police custody until 5 days after she was killed. Which means they have no way of knowing what messages were read at what times, because that would be important, because if messages were read after Phoebe was already deceased, that would indicate someone else was looking through her phone. But now they have no idea. The police themselves never consulted their e-crime division to thoroughly examine the CCTV footage from the building. They just didn't. And then the coroner ruled Phoebe's death an accidental death. And the detectives just said, okay, that's what it is. And that was it. Her family and friends obviously did not want to believe that this was an accident, understandably so. She was intoxicated heavily. She was on a strong sleeping pill. She was very much impaired. Other people, not police, proved how difficult it was just for a sober person to get into that trash chute on their own. How difficult for a very impaired person to do it then, without any handrails, without falling or cutting themselves or anything like that. How? But to police, the case was closed. They just thought that this was an accident or she did it to herself on purpose. They used her depression The fact that at one time she had a cut on her wrist, like a long, long time ago. They said, oh, she has a history of suicide attempts. What a way, this is not a way normal people end their own lives. Jump off the building, use a gun. There's so many other ways that people would normally do this. I don't understand why someone would enter a trash chute, struggle to get into one, to end their own life. It's so bizarre. It's not impossible. It could have certainly happened, but it just seems very odd. Strangely enough, Anthony Hampel would go on to find himself a new girlfriend. Her name was Bailey Schneider. In 2018, Bailey was found deceased in her own apartment. She had a rope or some kind of ligature around her neck. In her blood system was cocaine and alcohol. They believed, the police said, she hung herself in the kitchen and then I guess at some point fell. I guess due to the dead weight at that point. But they said, yep, she was ruled as a suicide. So now 2 women in this man's life have died in suspicious, what police are saying, suicidal ways. Potentially suicidal or accidental. Bailey's friends and family said, she was depressed, but no more than most normal people. She never ever indicated she was going to end her life. Just another very bizarre situation. But unfortunately, that's it. That's where we're left. Phoebe Hansjuck's case is considered closed, and it was considered an accidental death. Since police didn't investigate Anthony, they don't, what would be his motive? Well, they didn't really investigate that, so we don't really know. He was described as a volatile person, so maybe they got into a fight in the apartment because there's blood and there's glass, and then he, did something, knocked her out, I don't know, and then put her down that trash chute. There weren't any witnesses to say it. There weren't any witnesses who said that there was a screaming argument. So no one knows because no one investigated this. And that's it. That is the end of this case. I don't know how I feel. I personally just look at it and go, I don't understand how she could have done that on her own if she was that intoxicated. But it's also not impossible. I just find it a very strange circumstance, given how drunk she was. I don't know. What do you guys think? I know this is a very polarizing story. There's a lot of back and forth opinions on this one, but unfortunately, unless the family or someone can convince the police to reopen this case, just to at least look into the possibilities she was murdered, this case is at a standstill. And I just hope that one day, somehow, some way, the family can get all of the actual answers to this and find out what exactly and actually happened to Phoebe Hansjuck. Because if justice needs to be served, then they should be rightfully trying to seek that justice. And they just simply want to know what happened to Phoebe Hansjuck. But that is it for this case, True Crime-Maroonies. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled your way into this video, hello, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories here and over on TikTok, so please subscribe to me here. Follow me over on TikTok if you like. It's linked in the link tree in the description of this video below. Next, if you have a case you want me to cover, please email me. You can email me. The email is listed below. Just let me know the person's name, where it happened, when it happened, and eventually I'll add it to my list. I cannot tell you when I'll cover that case because I pick my cases at random. It will happen eventually, just don't know when. But that is it for this video. True Crime, my Roni Downy Ding Dong. So, my nose itches. It's not your business. I don't know why I need to tell you that. You have eyes, you can probably see that. Here I go again. One of my stupid, don't know how to end the video tangents. Scratching my nose. I almost picked my nose right there. That would have been gross to see on video, huh? What am I? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so far gone and lost on this. Goodbye, everybody. Okay, Molly. Molly's also complaining. Molly's dancing. Oh my god. She's having a panic attack because she can't see you. Alright, anyway. Goodbye. Goodbye, True Crime Maroonies. See you in the next video. Alright, great.